Hi everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Build with Stakki. I'm very excited this week as we have someone from sort of a similar background to me in the industry that I used to be in, providing outsourced services. So we've got the great David Meyer here, MD and CRO at Clarify. Clarify provide integrated sales development and marketing services specifically to the sort of enterprise space, helping them take new products to market and grow their revenue and their pipeline. David, pleasure to have you on. Was there anything there that I cocked up or that you wanted to rephrase?
Only the pronunciation of my surname, which we might need to record it. Yeah, so it's Meyer, which only people who know me really well would have even spotted. But
there you go.
So do you want to have another go, or do you want to leave it at that and run?
we can leave it at that.
It was only because you asked, otherwise I'd have left it. But yeah.
Well, in that case, everyone, here's David Meyer, MD and CRO over at Clarify. They provide fully integrated sort of sales development and marketing, specifically to the enterprise to help them build their pipeline and take new products to market. Been doing that for
a couple of decades. Yeah, a couple of decades. So 20 years.
Huge amount of expertise in sort of that enterprise side of building pipeline. And so we'll get into the meat and bones of maybe the differences between that and other markets, sort of mid-market stuff. But let's initially go into our Build with Stakki and understand a little bit more what David and his team are using to deliver. So if I share my screen. Here we are. So by now, most people probably understand sort of the format and why we've done it in this way. David, which sort of CRM is your main place of work for your SDRs? And is it only the one? Or as an agency, do you get dragged into using a few?
So we do get dragged into using a few because for some customers, we're working directly on their tech stack rather than ours. But for the kind of sake of ease of the conversation, I'll focus on our core stack, if you like, which is Salesforce.com would be the CRM that is the default. For some of our customers, we're using things like Microsoft Dynamics, but we may have to touch things like HubSpot, but that's typically where it sits.
Okay. Salesforce, very good sort of enterprise level CRM, lots of complex things it can do, which perfect for sort of, I guess, the industry you're in. Also doesn't surprise me that you mentioned a lot of Microsoft Dynamics sometimes. I imagine, again, because the enterprise businesses you work with, particularly maybe from that IT background, they're probably heavily in Dynamics because it comes part and package of maybe they're a Microsoft reseller, they are in the IT industry, and that's what they've had for a long time.
Yeah, I would say the majority are Salesforce, but yeah, there are a few on Dynamics, and we've got kind of two centers or clusters of customers. We've got some really big, well-established ones, as you say, and then we've got some high-growth scale-ups as well. Some of whom I think have dabbled with Pipedrive, but then decided to kind of their sales motion is focused on enterprise, and so they very quickly realized that Salesforce has the kind of capability they need around multiple entities and the complexity of opportunity types and those kinds of things that they want to be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And so then I imagine being a Salesforce users, you yourself, you probably have quite a large SDR team, large outbound sales teams, who they need that attention to detail that Salesforce can provide. And, particularly obviously being agency, segmentation, protecting lists and data and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How many reps have you got working through it?
There's probably about 100 in total globally. And that's a mix of those working on, it might be slightly more than that actually, but working for our clients, where everything that they're doing is representing the client. And obviously we've got our own sales and marketing function as well that's leveraging those tools.
Excellent. And then obviously the next stage then is how do we get the right data? How do we get the right accounts together and the right data for those contacts? What type of solutions are you using for that?
Yeah, so I guess cutting across both the data and the research piece. We're doing a lot of enrichment in the back end, and that's entirely down to your advice, James. So thank you many months ago. So we're using Upsell nailed it, so that the individuals are able to add those contacts into Salesforce at the back end, and then enriching it using a combination of ZoomInfo, Apollo, and probably a couple of others, which I will spot on the screen when we get there. And so we're trying to move towards a kind of waterfall cascade kind of methodology around that. I did see Clay earlier. We're just starting to explore how that might work for us and for our clients, in particular use cases. But I think it's one of those, you have to be really careful that the answer isn't Clay, what's the question again? And that we need to get really focused on what are the use cases? What are we actually going to do with it?
That's such a good way of putting it. I'm going to steal that.
Go for it. All yours.
What's the question again? Because you're right. Clay is very powerful. Clay can help you consolidate, research, can help you build like your own waterfalls with different data enrichment tools and stuff like that. So it can create some efficiency. But a salesperson or the SDR themselves can end up lost in it, maybe break a couple of things, and then they've lost half a day trying to fix something small. When actually what we want is that efficiency for them to continue to prospect and put more time into their prospecting effort. And that's where Upsell, that's why we made that recommendation and why you've had such success with it. Because for those people who aren't familiar with it, when you have a scenario where you have ZoomInfo in place, maybe you have a Cognism in place because you have a global team, that can stack up quite expensive licensing costs. And you also have your reps with multiple extensions on the screen. They click one, hasn't got the data, so they go to the next, That can really slow reps down. Upsell allows every single rep to have a single Upsell license. They call it their hotkeys. Couple of buttons, it creates the contact from LinkedIn straight into the CRM, can enrich that. They've got very good data, particularly in the US and the UK. But what that allows is you to reduce, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what allowed you to reduce your licenses across the team from your other vendors and then go back to them. So you went back to ZoomInfo and Apollo, for example, and were able to ask them for a credit-based model to plug any gaps that Upsell didn't provide.
That's exactly it. And so, as you say, the benefit of that is our team have a streamlined experience. They're working where they want to work, which is very often things like LinkedIn Sales Nav and so on. They're not there's not the context switching of moving from one tool to another. On the vendor's part, they're not selling us that access. They're just selling us the credits for the data that we're using. And so, it's worked out really well for us. So far, it's given us the ability to have more data from more different sources because we've repurposed some of that expense that we were spending on giving people access to a tool that was just cluttering their view of the world as they went.
More data, more coverage, less clutter and distraction for the reps, which is why it's such a powerful thing. And I think I still come back to it regularly for anybody that's particularly in sort of the enterprise space, and they're using the more expensive providers like ZoomInfo, Cognism, etc. Excellent. And then intent, is that something we need to cover?
Yeah, although it works in an interesting way for us because it's client by client. Most of the intent is sitting on their systems and their tools. So there are times where we will put an overlay on a campaign or program that we're running that gives us that particular view. But more often than not, the intent is coming from actually slightly different sources than the ones that you've got flagged here. So it's more the marketing intent. It's coming from Sixth Sense. It's coming from those kinds of tools as an indicator of where there might be, where at an account level there might be more engagement needed. And that's more of an input for our marketing practice, who are then activating those accounts, because it's not terribly helpful to give to an SDR the fact that HSBC is showing intent. Like, where do I go with that? What do I do with that information? Because it's you're pointing it at 100,000 people or something. So it's trying to stitch that together into a marketing cadence and rhythm that allows them to focus their time and energy where it's going to be most productive.
Yeah, and on that actually, that's a good point. Where a lot of intent, I think, has been misused over the last few years, or misrepresented, maybe unwillingly, maybe willingly. But like that HSBC example, just because they've looked for someone there has looked at a couple of things, give that to an SDR, and it doesn't really help like a great deal. So what I'm starting to see now, and probably a little bit of something going on our back end, because I notice we've got some duplication here. But tools like Zimplify, they actually will pull in the same way as people are familiar with sort of waterfall data enrichment with tools like Better Contact and Full Enrich. Zimplify has almost like a waterfall intent option. So they'll pull in from Bombora, they'll pull in from Sixth Sense, they'll pull in from Cognism, they'll pull in from multiple different areas, and then you can also plug in some of your own systems. And then they'll cross-reference all of that and then look for the right contacts, which are most likely to be for whatever your relevant area is. So it helps get a little bit narrower, but I'm not sure it depends on people's opinion of intent, I would say.
Yeah, and I think the intent sector's got a bit of work to do to recover some of its reputation over the last little while. I think the fact that a lot of that stuff was being tagged as if it was a marketing qualified lead has created a lot of issues that people are going to have to unstitch and figure out.
A lot of it's created probably some frustration and stuff in like the SDR teams, right? And that one of the things I think we're going to talk about later, that coordination between marketing, sales development, and sales.
Yeah.
If the tool's going to like add friction to that, which can already be full of friction already, then it's going to maybe be better to not add it into the mix just yet. What then are the main channels for you for your outreach? I imagine in the enterprise space, a lot of dialing goes on, of course, but you probably also do have some good sequencing tools in use like Salesloft or something similar.
Yeah, so we've got Salesloft as the kind of core platform for that piece. And again, I would say one of the things that's really important in all sales, but I would say particularly in the enterprise, is these are high value engagements. You've only got a narrow window, so you can't over automate this stuff. So it's a really tricky balance for us to give people the tools that allow them to automate, but the controls that say you can only do it if it's really well personalized. And by personalized, I mean relevant to that individual in the context of the account, the industry they're in, etc. And so there's a lot of work that has to go on around that piece in particular.
Yeah, and again, going back to probably what me and you are both a bit fanboys of being Upsell. Upsell also integrates with Salesloft. So whilst your team are doing their sourcing, they're on their LinkedIn's, they are looking for the right contacts. Click of a button, they can create that contact both in the CRM and in Salesloft into a specific list or into a specific sequence without having to navigate away from LinkedIn. So again, for your team, it's going to create that real efficiency. And then do you use the Salesloft inbuilt dialer, or have you got another dialer?
Yeah, so today we're using the Salesloft dialer for the majority of cases. There's a limited trial that's been taking place in North America in that team, looking at Nooks as a way of creating an environment around the dialer. Parallel dialing doesn't really work in our world. Technically it works, but you're trying to create a one-to-one engagement, initiate a relationship where the context really matters. So it's more a power dialer rather than a parallel dialer use case for us.
Yeah. I think power dialing is better than parallel dialing, unless you have like a very large TAM.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a transactional sale, and potentially you have maybe like someone else actually doing all of the list work and follow-up work and tracking work, because with a parallel dialer, it's a lot messier. Whilst a power, one after the other, I know who's coming next. I can see the context whilst it's ringing. If you're a good caller, it doesn't slow you down that much. It just adds to your efficiency.
Yeah, and then I think the team have fed back that they've really got a lot of value out of the Nooks kind of environment where they're all together. They're able to drop in and listen to other people's calls, and some of the coaching that's been going on from that standpoint has been beneficial as well.
Yeah.
But as I say, it's a kind of trial at this point. looking at the value and return side of things at the moment.
Nice. Interesting. Nooks is on here somewhere, but maybe it's not putting through properly. Again, developing, ongoing, so always little errors. But I would recommend also maybe comparing it to Orem. Orem have built more of their own back-end infrastructure for the dialers rather than Nooks, which still sits on top of Twilio. So I imagine some of the stuff that's going to happen over the next year or two, in the same way we saw a lot of noise about email deliverability, subdomains, warm-up infrastructure, all this type of stuff. I feel like that's maybe something that's going to be around the corner for dialing as restrictions on connection rates, local numbers, all that type of stuff starts to come more into play. Orem could be a really good option maybe to compare and consider, and I think might just outperform Nooks over the next couple of years.
It's really useful to know. Yeah, I was aware that Nooks were using Twilio's infrastructure. I wasn't aware that Orem had built their own or kind of separate.
Yeah. Excellent. And then that's, I imagine, most of the stack, or are there any particular, there's Nooks. Stuck into the wrong category.
Yeah, and SalesNav is a big expense for us, so whether that exists somewhere. But
do you think Sales Navigator is still necessary for all teams?
Almost all, yeah. We've not found a reliable way around it, and again, that might be use case specific because we're in enterprise accounts. A lot of what we're looking for are relationships between individuals and trying to figure out who's who in the zoo, and just trying to keep track of where people are. It's still probably the most reliable source of that information today.
Excellent. So that's pretty comprehensive sales stack there. Any other things that we're missing, or tools you really think are absolutely necessary? Maybe some things around enablement or any other tools?
Yeah, so enablement-wise, we use a solution called Exonify to reinforce some of the learnings across the team, and it's knowledge-based principally rather than skills-based, but it's about making sure people know what they need to know about their clients, about the programs, about those kinds of pieces. We use a ton of AI to support some of what we're doing. Some of that is a kind of custom GPTs that we've built for particular use cases. Again, I try really hard to figure out the use case first, then we've got to play with AI to figure out what it can do, but then ultimately it needs to be use case driven, not just we made this thing, let's hope it works. We've built our own AI solution as well, a bespoke platform that does really deep research, which is very relevant for us in a kind of, if you're trying to really understand a very large, complex organization and all the people in it, you've got to go further than even the deep research piece does, and you've got to give it more information and insights, and you've got to protect all of that data. So we've done some good work on that. And then there's a lot in our marketing stack that we're not talking about from this standpoint, but if that's ever helpful to you, James, I'm very happy to have the team talk you through what they're using to manage that end of the process as well.
I'm sure we'll cross into that at some point in the future. So that use of AI is something that me and you spoke about recently. Actually, is you've got to know what you want it to achieve before you let too many people play with it and start adding it in willy-nilly. But I think one of the big next steps for AI is it's going to be in CRM, doing the research, cross-referencing all of your previous notes and pulling that to the front whilst your SDRs prospect. And that's one of the things I'm quite excited for. I see a few tools maybe starting to do that a little bit, but I haven't seen anybody really nail that yet. HubSpot have OpenAI built in, or some integration there as well now, so that kind of does a little bit with their Copilot in the corner, but I think it's going to get much more sophisticated.
The other tool from a sales standpoint that we haven't talked about is a tool called ClosePlan. So it's designed principally for the AE community, but it's a deal planning, opportunity planning, account planning piece. And it's not deployed across everybody in the organization, but within our own sales team, that's a super helpful way of tying things together. We're exploring connecting that back into the wider data stack so that you could see you're building an org chart, but are they really engaging with what we're
Yeah.
doing? How can we link activity back to individual personas and so on? So if you haven't seen it, it's worth having a look. It's part of people.ai's stack.
Okay, nice. Take a look at that. So from like, I guess that outbound perspective here for everyone, this is quite like an enterprise level sales stack here. We've got Salesforce, ZoomInfo, Salesloft, probably Nooks, tools that people would associate very much with like that enterprise level. But one of the key things that I think allows this to work for you and your team is the addition here of Upsell, which has allowed you, not everyone needs a license for all of these data options. People can use Upsell and then they can use LinkedIn. They can do a lot of their work from LinkedIn. They hit a couple of buttons. Upsell creates that contact record in the CRM and into Salesloft. And we're just then allowing, really good calling and enablement habits around that activity as well. Sounds really nice and efficient system.
Yeah, our principal channels of engagement are email, phone, and LinkedIn, and I think Upsell made a big difference to how quickly and easily teams can get to that information. It's not.
Excellent.
You're still dependent on the quality of the data behind it. Nothing's ever perfect, but it's I would say it's one of the unsung heroes of the last 12 months probably.
Yeah, exactly. Well, great stuff. So let's love to, I guess, widen the conversation, David, and understand just a bit more about some of your experience with enterprise selling, building the teams that you've built. Because you are very focused on the enterprise side, so how do you feel that really like differs to maybe mid-market and maybe startups? Because that's a lot of the advice we do see on LinkedIn and people spout is much more at that end of the spectrum, whilst me and enterprise is probably quite different.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's the trouble with stuff online. The stuff that gets engagement is the absolutes. This is the right way to do it, and all these other ways are dead or dying. Cold calling is dying, or this is dying, or that's dying. And I get why that drives engagement. People either get cross with it and engage, or they agree with it wholeheartedly and engage. And so that's what those algorithms are there to do. But I think the world is more nuanced than that. And an enterprise is a multi-stakeholder engagement, very often across multiple divisions, very often across multiple regions. And so there's a real complexity in that means some of the things that work really well in the SMB or mid-market space don't scale very well into that space. You haven't got an unlimited TAM. You've got a much smaller volume of much higher value engagements. And so you have to turn up in a different way to make those as effective as possible. And so some of the tactics that work just great, like parallel dialing in SMB, you apply that to enterprise. You've just got your own sellers are kind of rabbit in the headlights and spraying and praying, hoping they find a project in amongst tens of thousands of people in an organization that's just not going to get you anywhere. You're going to waste a lot of time and energy and potentially upset a lot of people. So it just needs to be more deliberate and careful in that sense. And equally, some of the things that I would advocate doing in the enterprise don't scale down. Like they're not, account-based marketing being a great example. If you're doing one-to-one kind of account-based ABM and kind of go-to-market, where you're trying to get the sales developers and the marketeers working together with the AEs, with RevOps and SalesOps to pull together a vision of what are we doing in this particular account, that isn't scalable. You try and do that into the mid-market, the cost to do it just doesn't stack up, doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And so whilst those things, you're right, like obviously the different tactics don't necessarily scale up or scale down in those ways. But what's the best? Is there a best channel for enterprise, or is it very much dependent on target market, personas, regions?
I think the regions, personas, and so on play a really big part. So if I took as an example cybersec, if you were trying to target senior people in the cybersec space, or indeed the kind of operational layer, they are as a and this is massive generalization, but it's it's there for a reason. This kind of stereotype is they don't pick up the phone. They're very used to being behind a screen, and so you have to engage them on that channel first. You might then get a call or a Teams or whatever with them, but that would be a good illustration of you need to emphasize it more that way for that kind of persona. Whereas I would say the general trend in enterprise is mobile phones are the most successful channel of engagement. And but yeah, there are lots of outliers. And as you say, regional, you've got a whole other dynamic at play. How you initiate an engagement in the DACH region versus the UK is fundamentally different. The US is fundamentally different again, and even your definitions don't necessarily translate. So what we talk of as enterprise here in EMEA, if you go to the US, that they can use what we would use as mid-market tactics work for most of enterprise in the US, and they start to then shift that when they get into what they might call named accounts, global accounts, strategic accounts, majors, whatever terminology they're using for those really, really big ones. That's where those tactics, it's not that the tactics don't work, it's that it becomes, you can't scale the mid-market stuff stateside beyond a particular point, but that point is higher than it is in EMEA, where enterprise is a smaller group of organizations that you're trying to break into.
Absolutely. And I imagine that has some impact on how you perhaps want to structure the team that are executing on it. Perhaps, more like the SDR to AE split, or how many accounts one SDR should really be focusing on at any one time. So I know that's what I saw when I went from the UK to opening an office in the States. Just like the amount of lists or the amount of data I'd asked the team to cover, or how many AEs to reps, slightly differed.
Yeah, I would say both those things are true to an extent. With the AE coverage, for us in particular, we have to be really careful that we could very easily end up in a scenario where we spend more time, I suppose it's true for anybody, but we could spend more time talking to the AEs than we are to their prospects. And that's a bit of a waste of time. So you're trying to balance that off. Certainly the size of territory is again connected to, well, what's the size of the prize in those accounts and how mature is it? So if it's a solution that's on a long replacement cycle, something like ERP, you're going to need more accounts, but you're also going to have to emphasize building a relationship over the long term, not just hunting for projects right here, right now, because there are going to be very few live projects, but there are lots of people who've got problems. So how do we connect the problems, the consequences, get to the right level of power and authority to move those forward? And then you've got to connect the way the sellers interact with an enterprise SDR. I think is very different as well. You're having to help the sellers understand that they might have to step in and out of an opportunity over a period of time, because whilst they're not in a buying cycle, we need the AE's expertise to move them forward through the selling cycle, to build a business case, to move things forward, and so on. And so helping them understand that we're getting them into engagements that aren't necessarily yet at the project budget kind of phase, but will be if we play our cards right over the next 6 months or whatever, and keep that with the SDRs. And so the SDRs might have to nurture things for a lot longer, have to do more discovery themselves, have to engage multiple stakeholders themselves. It's a very different rhythm, I suppose, and cadence that we would advocate versus a mid-market scenario, and versus most of the agencies that people would choose to use, which are more predicated on booking meetings rather than how are we converting that to pipeline and to revenue further down the line.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you about sort of your experience from agency, and there's definitely been a greater shift now, I think, towards focusing on relationships. So rather than an SDR booking an account, forgetting about it, either hand it to the AE or don't. It's now like you say, you can bring that seller in and out of the engagement, but you want to nurture it on a much longer sort of time frame, because that's what's going to actually move the needle. And so long as both all the sales team are involved, understand that will lead to a greater payoff down the line. But where people go wrong is, maybe it's by touching on what we said before about intent. Are these people looking in market now? everyone put all your focus on here. It's like we're already a bit too late to that party, but let's build as many relationships within this TAM or this target market as we can, and nurture those, put them in the right buckets, follow up at the right time, and use different people within our team with different expertise to help nurture that along. And then everyone wins.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is people kind of learning the wrong lessons from other areas. So it's the that kind of transactional mindset of only one person can own this at any given time, which is of course true, but this idea that once it's gone to the AE, it's the AEs and the SDR is out of it, in the same way that the MQL goes to SDs and to the sales developers and their marketing are out of it. It's just very transactional thinking and works very well in an SMB kind of mid-market environment. In the enterprise, it just does. Like, marketing has to be involved all the way through the life cycle. How are we educating and shifting this buying center's consensus in a direction that we're trying to get to? Sales developers might need to do more than they would in another environment as well. How do we multi-thread? How do we help the AE have some plausible deniability in who they're getting to? We've got them to one of the right people who's now being very protective and saying, well, you can only talk to me. Okay, well, we know that's going to ultimately not be the right answer. Yeah. How do we use the sales developer marketing to broaden the engagement in that account, give us a better chance of winning? And again, I'm talking about things that work. You could apply that to mid-market, but it might be a very expensive way of winning that deal. In enterprise, if it's going to be a 6, 7, 8-figure deal, that investment is worth it because you're building a relationship. You're trying to, we're going to win this account one day. It might be 2 years' time, but we're going to win it one way or the other mentality, rather than are they in market now? What can we do with them? And again, I totally get and respect what the intent providers are doing. Makes perfect sense to the majority of the market that they're selling it to. But there's a bit of, and they know that. That's why they're shifting their emphasis onto buying groups and things like that. They've found ways of trying to understand what's going on in that account, and that makes them more relevant for a more sophisticated sales process.
Yeah, good point. So we were talking a lot there about, I guess, like cross communication between marketing, sales development, integrating those three teams and having like a really aligned team. What are the main ways you do that, particularly from when marketing? I think this is where most people might struggle, is when it's marketing goes to sales development looking for an AE. Maybe the sales development and AE, they communicate because they probably on a day-to-day work more closely. They might communicate and give each other, ask the SDR to go back into accounts and stuff like that. But how do you get that marketing